Welcome back to the Freedom First podcast. We are your hosts, Blaine Smotherman
and Eric Hearn.
This episode is brought to you in part by Jeffries Firearms Training.
Shooters making shooters. For more information, contact owner Ronnie Jeffries on Instagram at Jeffries Firearms Training.
Are you looking for a wide variety of firearms, ammunition, and equipment? NAG Industries is a premium, local, veteran, and family-owned company in Bakersfield, California. They offer expertise in sales, repair, enhancement, and service of a wide variety of firearms, ammunition, and equipment with a focus on law enforcement and government agencies. For more information, you can visit them on Instagram at in.a.g_industries, through email info@nagindustries.com, or you can give them a call at 661-364-9726. NAG Industries, pride in what we do. Welcome. You have now entered the Freedom First podcast,
where we have conversations with some of the most interesting human beings on the planet.
People who live and breathe in Freedom First mentality. On today's episode, we had an amazing guest on. She is a Puerto Rican-born Cuban, and she shared her story of her family who currently lives back in Cuba, what's currently happening in Cuba with the protests going on. And she also spoke about her transition of, going to college in Puerto Rico and then ending up at Florida International University. We talked about the destruction of socialism and communism and the ideology that goes behind it. We also talked about her grandparents and her family, going through the regime and the revolution in Cuba back in, all the way going back to the 50s and through the revolution itself, and even many of her aunts, her uncles, and her family that currently live in Cuba, what's happening. And we talked about her experience of, currently working for Senator Marco Rubio and what she's doing in her fight to give a voice to Cubans and other people and countries in Latin America. I was so honored, humbled, and privileged to have her on. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Angélica Franganillo-Diaz. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Freedom First podcast. Today we have on Angélica. She is you basically consider yourself a Puerto Rican Cuban, right?
Yeah.
And your family's from Cuba.
All my family's from Cuba.
And there's still most of them are still there, as you had said. And I see the articles that you've written, and you continue to fight for the freedom of Cubans and get their voices heard, which is what we're here for today. And so I just welcome you on the show. I thank you for joining us today. And I just want you to quickly tell us who you are briefly and kind of what you do, and then we'll kind of jump into it.
So my name's Angélica. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. My family immigrated from my grandpa's side, and they immigrated to Puerto Rico in the 1970s. My dad is from Cuba. He was actually born in Cuba, and he came in 1997, and me and my sister were born in 98. I basically grew up in the most Cuban part of Puerto Rico. It's called Isla Verde. I was raised in a community called Casa Cuba, or Casa de Cuba, Círculo Cubano de Puerto Rico. Translated, the Cuban Circle of Puerto Rico, House of Cuba, which was basically the Cuban community where they would join. We would celebrate all the traditions that were in the island, just basically everything. We would do dances. We just basically following all the traditions that were once in Cuba, that sadly, because of the religion, it doesn't exist anymore. So I did 2 years in Puerto Rico college. I'm a political science major, just graduated. I did 2 years, and then I transferred here to Miami. And here in Miami, I have a lot of family too, from Cuba also, who immigrated here. And I finished off my bachelor's in FIU. I'm currently working for Senator Marco Rubio at his office. There's a lot of constituent services, and especially here in Miami, there's a lot of immigration services for humanitarian parole, for just basically everything, especially now in Cuba, because the situation is very, very critical. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I want to say thank you for having me, Blaine. It's an honor.
Yeah, well, we're so humbled and honored to have you, and just to have you tell your story and share the stories of Cubans, whether they're in Miami or your family and friends still back in Cuba. So we appreciate you joining, and we're excited to hear your story and get those stories of Cubans out. 'Cause
Yeah.
as we've seen, especially in the United States and other places around the world, we haven't seen what's really going on. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and
Yeah,
so
there is.
we're excited to hear your story and hear the stories of Cubans. So on every episode, we have a segment called the Freedom Minute, and this is just a segment to get to know the guests we have on and kind of just get the episode started. So I'm gonna go ahead and start it off. So the first question is, if you were selected as president of the United States of America for a day, what would be the first thing you would do?
Oh my God, this is so easy. I would just basically cut all unnecessary taxes, because I feel the United States has so many irrelevant taxes, like the sales tax, just property tax. I would take that out. I just to make because I feel like we have lost that entrepreneur feeling, because I feel like taxes, you want to start a business, you have to pay this, you have to pay that. So my first thing would be eliminate all unnecessary taxes.
Right.
Just keep it as small as possible.
Right. There's so much red tape to get into anything, like small businesses, and it just it kind of hinders anyone from going into business, but also just like that red tape. There's so many little steps to do anything today, and
we're supposed to be the freest country in the world, and we're because of all these taxes on property, we're on the freedom index, we're 37, which I feel like it's very scary.
Right.
It's very we're losing our momentum, we're losing our freedom.
Right.
We're basically we're supposed to be the economic freedom of the world, and we're losing it because of all these unnecessary taxes.
And hopefully we could put the right people in place to get that back. So, second question, what failure have you learned the most from?
I think the most important, basically, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I had my mindset set on that. It didn't go. I felt like a complete failure. It didn't go well, like I said, and I felt like a failure, but I feel like these failures only make you stronger, and they open doors for what you really want. I always loved communications and journalism, and with the whole Cuba thing started, I started to communicate more, and I started writing, and opened up a blog, and I feel like if I was in law school doing that now, I wouldn't be able to do what I was doing now. So I feel like that failure, although it sounds basically it's not, but it learned me that some doors closes just for bigger and better ones to open. So that's something I'm really proud of in a way. So yeah, definitely that.
Right. I like that. And the reason I asked that question is because I believe there's no L's, there's no failures. They're all lessons.
Lessons for sure.
And like you said, they open up doors, and at the end of the day, things are meant how they're supposed to work out. And if one door closes, hopefully another one will open. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thanks for answering that one. And I have two more here. So this is one I ask every guest, and it's always interesting to see who they say. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's someone that is not even alive anymore, or sometimes it is someone that they're just close to. If you could sit down and have a conversation with anyone throughout the history of the world, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I always wanted to answer this question. I would totally sit down with Margaret Thatcher. I feel like she's a very empowering woman, although a lot of people do not like her. But I feel like in a time where, there was still a presumption that, women couldn't lead or women couldn't do this, just the same as men. She was such a gravitating force. And then she took all these policies, freedom, just like Reagan, which is my favorite president of all time. So I would totally sit down with her and just ask her, how did you do it? How did you handle it? And as a woman, how are you able to move from this progressiveness leftist toward that a lot of women were taking at the time, and just be head as strong? So I would definitely sit down with Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, she had that iron fist, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The Iron Lady. Last question, and the podcast is called the Freedom First Podcast. And so, what does freedom mean to you? What does it represent to you? How would you define it?
I mean, freedom means everything to me. I was born, it's a privilege. I was born privileged. It's supposed to be a natural right, but sadly it isn't. And having family in Cuba, you get to see that how fragile it is, and how of privilege it is. Just going to the store and just buying what you want, what you need, just be able to speaking out and just be able to decide for your life and having that independence. So for me, freedom means everything, and without freedom we have nothing. And I think it's very important we protect it, because it can go away like this. So yeah, for sure, it means everything to me.
Well, thank you so much for answering those questions just to get us started today. And that's going to lead us into, you kind of briefly explained your story, but I just want you, let's talk about your childhood, because obviously, your grandparents, did they both grow up and were born in Cuba?
Yeah, both my grandparents, were born and raised in Cuba. My grandpa, he's from the Canary Islands in Spain, but he was born in Cuba. His parents are from the Canary Islands, because a lot of where my family is from in Cuba. It's called a little town called Cabaiwan in the province of Las Villas. There was a lot of immigration from these islands, especially after the war with Franco, the Civil War. They came for job opportunities, and these people were known for their entrepreneurship, and they saw Cuba as like this land to just do that exactly. So both my great grandparents started their business. They were entrepreneurs. And my grandma, she's totally from Cuba. Her parents are from Cuba. And she was raised there. And my great grandparents from my grandma's side, they had a candy shop or a candy factory. Both of them did not know how to read or write. But with hard work and dedication, and with their skills and knowledge, they were able to make recipes and start selling these tiny, it's a cute, they started with pastelitos. It's like fried. It's like with guava. It's really good. It's amazing. If you're ever in Miami or any Cuban shop, try the pastelitos. So they would sell them every day, 6 a.m, on their backs, house to house, until they were able to have their candy shop or their candy factory in that little small town. And after the revolution, from my grandpa's side, since they were entrepreneurs, they wanted their business, their property, they saw that the revolution was going to take all the hard work they built, because my great-grandparent, he worked 20 hours every day. He was a very hard worker. So once the revolution started expropriating, said, this property is mine, they were like, no, we gotta go. They came to Miami. They couldn't with the English, so they said, let's go to Puerto Rico. It's an American territory, and they're Spanish. My grandma was a little different. Since my great-grandparents, they were very poor before they started out with their candy factory business. They actually liked the revolution. They were supportive. So they just went on until years passed, and they were like, yeah, they took everything from us. So they stayed. So my grandpa, he married my grandma, and my grandma, she was able to leave because they were married. So after a year and a half or so, my grandma was able to come to Puerto Rico. So all my family from my grandpa's side, they all left to Puerto Rico. From my grandma's side, everybody stayed. Her sisters, her parents, everybody. And she left in 1970, and in that same year, Cubans who left the island weren't still allowed to travel. They weren't still allowed to travel, but she met a friend who worked with it's the Olympic Department of Puerto Rico, and he was about to travel to Cuba. And she said, oh, I need to send stuff to my family. So from the year 1970, she has been sending medicine, toilet paper, food, just every basic necessity to her family, because there still isn't. And the situation now is more critical than ever. And for my dad was born and raised in Cuba. He was born in 1971, and he just basically lived. He was born after the revolution. So it's two different stories, because my grandparents lived before the revolution,
Right.
and they told me, yes, there was a necessity, but we were able to, we were free, we were able to go, we were able to buy, we were able to go to La Habana and just go to nice restaurants. Even if you had a lot of money, you were able to go and be necessarily free. And my dad, his story is very different. He says, since I was 8 years old, they would send me to school all alone, and they raised, he says, the revolution raised me, not my parents. I was raised very, military. He was, very military. I would have to do lines. He would tell me that when it was lunchtime, they were only allowed to eat if the line was completely straight. If there was a little curve, they weren't allowed to eat. So it was a very, very military style, Soviet style race. And some Cubans who were born after the revolution, they're pretty cold. They're pretty, because they've lived through stuff.
Right.
My dad left in 1997. It's funny because my mom, in one of my travels, because my dad is from the same town that my grandparents in Caguaguan.
Okay.
In one of my travels, because my mom was born in Puerto Rico. So in one of the travels, because my grandma she goes to Cuba every single year because of her mom. Her mom passed away in 2016, but she still has her sisters, her nephews, her nieces, just everybody. So in one of those trips, she met my dad. They fell in love and they got married, and that's why I'm here. He also went to Puerto Rico, and my dad, you can see the entrepreneurship that lives in Cuba. I say that Cubans are not communists. They have this entrepreneurship. They want to get along in life. They want to live life. So my dad basically came to Puerto Rico not knowing what a credit card was. And now he's a very successful engineer, and he has his job. And it's just basically what my grandpa said. We left Cuba not because we wanted economic opportunities, not because we wanted a good life. We wanted to leave Cuba because we wanted liberty. That's their answer, because we left Cuba because there was no freedom. And that's why I say freedom is everything to me, because freedom allows you to do everything you want in life, from the smallest of things to the biggest of things. So, me being born, I was raised, like I told, I was raised in the Cuban circle of Puerto Rico, Casa Cuba, where there's also a lot of Cubans. You hear all the stories. You know about all the traditions. Just I feel extremely Cuban. And I went to school, a Catholic school in Puerto Rico, where my mom also studied. And it's also basically, there's a lot of Cuban descent there. So I was very, very very, very into my roots. My first trip to Cuba was in 2019. I was going to visit my grandparents from my dad's side, because they're still in Cuba. I was about to meet them for the first time. And let me say that being allowed to go to Cuba to see your family, it's a privilege. Not everybody has the honor to, or are allowed to, or some even are prohibited going back from the island. It's very sad.
Because they spoke out against the regime.
Because they spoke out.
Or whatever, the government.
Mm-hmm. I can't go now.
Right.
I can't go now, basically, because all I've spoken. So yeah, it's a privilege. And it was very, because I grew up basically in the traditions of Cuba before the revolution. So it was very shocking to see how everything was lost. Values, traditions. I think Cuban lifestyle is just basically surviving. That's all I can describe Cuban society. See, it's survival. It's how do I get food on my table to feed my children? Do I rob it? Do I steal it? Do I take it away from someone? Do I kill a cow or a pig without the government knowing, risking my own life just to eat food? So that's how I would describe Cuban society right now.
Yeah, and then you see, whether it's on social media or these stories that have been told, there's so much perseverance in Cubans. Without the necessities they have, they still make of what they actually do have, and like you said, they're surviving. But I just want to go back. I thought it was interesting when you had said that I think your grandparents, way back when the revolution originally, they had supported it, and you see this happening in even places like you could say the United States right now. Venezuela was the same way. A lot of people supported it at the beginning. Why do you think that is? Was it just because of the promises that were presented, or?
I think it's because my grandpa, he would tell me, when you read the Communist Manifesto, when you read everything that the Cuban government was promising, you're like, this sounds very beautiful. Everybody equal. Everybody have it. Everybody sharing with their neighbors. But my grandpa would then told me, but when you put it in practice, it doesn't work. Because even though pre-revolutionary life, there was more opportunity to grow into economic opportunities like my grandparents did, there was still a lot of necessity. There was still a lot of poverty in Cuba. I would say more than 70% of the island was still living very bad conditions. So when this revolution comes, and remember Fulgencio Batista, the president, the dictator before Fidel, he did a coup d'etat also. And people were very mad. And people were against that. He was basically just filling the light in Cuba. So when Fidel comes, because remember, Fidel started saying he wasn't a communist. He had the language. He had said nice things that if you look now, they do sound communist. They do sound socialist. But when he comes and say, no, everybody's equal. We're going to go down with the elite. We're going to go down with the bourgeoisie. It sounds nice. It sounds beautiful. Everybody's going to be equal. And, Cubans are very familiar with their neighbors, with everybody. And my grandma would tell, I had friends in school who were like my sisters. They were poor. And then you have this person telling you, that we're all going to be equal. You're like, wow, this is why, it sounds nice. We want this. But like I said, once you put it in practice and they take your property, they take your freedom, they take everything, you're like, no, this doesn't work. It's not going to work. And remember, this was 1959.
Right.
We had the Soviet Union, right? But nobody knew what was going on in the Soviet Union. Because remember, they enclosed all the communist dictatorships. They enclosed all the information. So they didn't know. But this romantic language, they're like, okay, yes. And remember, Cuba has never been a stable country.
Right.
Cuba, there's always been political unstableness since the beginning. And with the United States had a lot of influence on who was in power and who was not. So it's been a country that's always been seeking that Cuba Libre, that free Cuba. And there has been many different definitions of what a free Cuba is. Jose Marti, he is basically, they call him the apostle of Cuba. He said that Cuba, for him, a lot of people admire Fidel basically based off his revolution off him. But if you really read Jose Marti, he loved capitalism. He was a person who even wrote about the dangers of socialism and the dangers of Karl Marx. But a lot of people don't know that. So for Marti, he said that a free Cuba, una Cuba libre, was a Cuba that was completely independent of the self and was not influenced by anybody. So the term of Fidel Castro for Cuba Libre, like he said, he wanted to be like Jose Marti. It was basically not, because right after the revolution, Cuba was able to subsist, first because of the Soviet Union, and then Venezuela. So they're still looking for that different. There hasn't been a Cuba Libre. So yeah, basically.
Right, and I mean, I've never talked to anyone that's lived under, whether it's a communist dictatorship or a socialist regime that have, actually lived under it and promoted it in a positive way. The people, like we see the people that are advocating for this socialist ideology, almost none of them have ever experienced or lived under it. And that's concerning to me. And it seems very clear cut that they would understand this. Because like you said, it sounds good. The language sounds good. Equality. Oh, we're going to be equal. But in practice, it kills that entrepreneurial spirit. It kills that drive to better yourself every day. And at the end of the day, it's never worked in the long run. In Venezuela, it worked for a little bit just because of the oil production, but look what's happened there. And look what's happened in Cuba and other places it's been tried.
Yeah. The thing is, communism, socialism, it goes against human nature. Our human nature, we're basically, human nature is individualistic. We watch out for ourselves, mostly other. It's a natural thing. And once you start promoting this thing about everybody equal, and it goes against that, because it's normal to want to take care of yourself, and it's normal to want yourself and those with you to, have a good life and everything. So it basically goes against, I would say, human nature in itself.
Right. And I mean, not to get too much into this aspect yet, but if you look at capitalist societies, they're not perfect, but when you basically take away taxes and you decrease taxes, it gives businesses and these capitalist ventures more access to funds to actually donate and give back and create funds and programs for the poor. So, I mean, if you actually look at the data and the money, capitalist infrastructures and institutions like what we have here in the United States, they actually give more money back to the poor than what a socialist government would give back. So it's mind-blowing to see, it's even happening in places like the United States right now.
It's very scary. Cuba, but before the revolution, the Cuban peso was at par with the dollar. It already had I must say, like a metro trail station, the first in Latin America. Basically, it had color television. It had, my grandma would tell me, had like its own version of Uber Eats. You would order food and people would bring it to your house. It was basically it was a Latin American economy that was growing by the millions. It was growing. So when the revolution came, it just halted all the progress, because capitalism is essentially that. It's progress. It doesn't start.
It's innovation.
You're not going to. Yeah, it's a progress. So basically, Cuba was going to be, if not even as richer or almost as rich as Venezuela, if the revolution didn't happen. Because we were rich on sugar, we were rich on coffee, we were rich on a lot of. It's very sad for me to think of, because you hear the stories pre-revolution. It's very sad. We were rich on so many things, and our infrastructure was growing. There was a lot of American investment. In the island, there were hotels. There was a Hilton. My grandma would tell, there was a Sears. There was all these stores. Like my grandma would tell me, we didn't need to go to Europe. We had Havana. Havana was a dream. It had everything and more. So it's very sad. It's very sad, and that's what people don't understand. Yes, it was bad. Yes, there was poverty, but like my great grandparents, millions of very, very poor people were leaving poverty every day because of these opportunities. So that's what people don't understand. What was like pre-revolution.
And so, growing up, your grandparents being, from Cuba, and your parents spending time in Cuba, what are some of the stories that you've heard, whether it was pre-revolution or during the revolution? What are some of these stories you heard that stand out to you?
Okay. So these are not isolated cases. This happens. These are thousands of cases. Like I said, everybody will know what really happened in Cuba once the dictatorship falls. We're going to see. So my grandma would tell me, my grandma started traveling to Cuba almost 10 years after she left. She left in 1970, and Fidel Castro allowed Cubans to go back to the island in 1979 for purely economic reasons. So my grandma, that first trip of hers, she tells me she gets to the airport in Havana, and she wants her sisters to see how life is like. My grandma took pictures of her life in Puerto Rico. She took magazines. So when she goes to the airport, there's this man, and he's like, "Open your bag." And my grandma was like, "Why?" "We want to see what you have." And my grandma, she basically showed everything. They took her into a room, and they were like, "Why are you bringing these photographs?" And there were photographs of my grandparents and my mom and my uncle on the beach, on the stores, just enjoying life, just basically like simple things. And like, "Why are you bringing this?" And my grandma was like, "I want to show my sisters, my kids, my life." They're like, you can't bring this. This is imperialistic propaganda. And you know what they did? All those pictures, this was 1979. It's not the technology we have now. Right. They went like this and they ripped it. Started ripping.
Wow.
Ripping. And my grandma just started crying. And my grandma had brought a lot of like magazines, like, like magazines that had celebrities on. The same thing. They ripped it. And they started threatening my grandma. They were like, you can't bring this. You're going to get in a lot of trouble. We know who you are. We know who your family is. We can just like get rid of them like that. And my grandma started crying. So what my grandpa did, my grandma was like 27 at the time. She was very young. My grandpa had like, I would say $200. And he went like this. And they were like, okay, you can pass. So it's a very, very corrupt system. Yesterday, my aunt, she also went to Cuba a lot during that time. She was telling me a story of how envious and resentful people are under communist dictatorships. So my aunt would tell me, this is my dad's aunt, just clarifying, my family.
Yeah.
So my aunt, she goes to Cuba. She would go more than my grandma. She would go every single year to Cuba. She would sacrifice. My aunts didn't have, her daughters didn't have quinceañeras because everything went to Cuba. They were like, think about Cuba. So everything they did, every money they would earn, it would go to Cuba. Also like my grandma. She would sacrifice things for herself, for her kids to send to Cuba because they didn't have anything. When I was little, my grandma would tell me, eat all the food, think about your family in Cuba, they don't have this. But anyways, going back to the story, my aunt, she would tell me that when she went to Cuba, she had like neighbors and friends who were like, take $200 for my family, take $300, take $400. And then she would tell me that a neighbor basically went to the CDR. The CDR is El Comité de la Defensa de la Revolución, the Committee of the Defense of the Revolution. And they basically are spies in every single neighborhood. So they're constantly hearing you, they're constantly watching you, just to see if you say anything or do anything against the revolution. So my aunt, she went to a store, and she went with the people who were supposed to receive the money from those friends. It was about $1,800 she had for that. And then comes this policeman. He was dressed in a military uniform, and he goes, "Who here is de la comunidad?" La comunidad is basically like a community person. They would call at a time people who would travel from the United States, from anywhere else to Cuba, who were from Cuba and left and we came back. And my aunt was like, that's me. And they told her, you have to come with us. And my aunt, she was like this. She was like, oh my God, what did I do? What happened? And they took her to her room. And they were like, you're not supposed to bring money like that. You have to give everything to me. Everything you have, give me the names and all the money you have, because you can't do this. And my aunt, she started freaking out because they told her, if you don't do this, you're going to go to jail. So you're going to jail, and, we don't know what's going to happen to you. Just very threatening. And then my aunt, she would tell me that she got this like stomach pain. She's like, I have to go to the bathroom. And when she went to the bathroom, the guard accompanied her because she couldn't go alone. So she was like this, and the guard with her like this, watching her. And when she comes back, she's like, this is everything I have. It was about, like I said, $1,800. And he took it. And when she came back, she was like desperate. She was crying because she's like, how do I tell the people who gave me the money, my friends, family members, that they took it from me? She only had a card that the guy gave him because she told him, well, I need a receipt, because he was like typing everything. She's like, well, I need a copy of this. And he was like, I'm not giving you. I can't do that. So she basically started crying. She took the card and she's like, yeah, they took everything. I can't help you. So she went back to her house, in her mom's house in Mayagüez. And another guard comes, knocks on the door. And he's like, you have to come with us again. And my grandma at this point, she was just like super pissed, super mad. She's like, why are they doing this? Yeah. And so basically the guard comes, and she told me she got really, really mad. She said, they already took this from me yesterday. A guard in Ciego de Ávila, that's where she was. It's a little bit farther from Mayagüez. From Ciego de Ávila. I have nothing else. So you guys robbed it from me. You guys stole it from me. And basically the guards were like super like, because nobody was ever able to like answer like that, because a lot of Cubans are scared. They're scared. Even when I travel to that, even though I'm an American citizen and they can't do anything, I'm scared because you don't know what's going to happen. They can disappear. They can take you to prison. It's just very, very scary. And the guards were like, "Oh no, sorry, ma'am. They told that there was a pretty lady here." And she just got super mad and she just stood up and just left.
Wow.
But like I said, they just take everything from you, everything. And it's a very resentful society, because it was a neighbor who found out that she was there, who told who told the police guy, who told basically the community spy.
So it's hard to
that
trust. It's hard to trust anyone.
It's hard to trust. It's hard to trust. You don't know who's watching you. You don't know who's talking to you. I remember being in Cuba with my family because I stay over at their house. And I just remember, because I'm accustomed to speak out. I'm not one to stay silent, And I was really mad about, I think it was that the light went off and you couldn't call because you're not supposed to or whatever. And I got really mad. I'm like, how could you guys just stand this? How could you guys just let the government step all over you? And they were like, so it's just like you're in a panic state all the time when you're in Cuba. Even when you live in Cuba, you're just like, who's watching me? Who's speak? It's just a very, very, very scary to live in Cuba and to be in Cuba, because you're scared all the time.
Right. And I mean, those stories they're powerful, and you hear it. Like I've seen so many on social media, and our last guest we had Ricardo Lamas and his father on talking about his father grew up under the Castro regime and escaped, and had guns pointed at him and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah. And like you said, these are stories that happen every day.
And there's so many stories, because both my grandparents, they were prisoners because of the simple fact they wanted to leave Cuba. My grandpa, he was supposed to leave with his mom and dad and his brothers and sisters, but he couldn't leave the island because he had military age and had to serve in the military and had to stay in Cuba. So he was basically in a concentration camp. Nobody knows this, but in Cuba there was concentration camps. They were called la UMAP. They were basically gulags, like in the Soviet Union. My grandpa was there 3 years. He doesn't talk about it. He only talks about it now because I ask him. So the UMAP was basically a concentration camp because Fidel wanted to raise 100 million canes of sugar, which he only got to 8 million. With that, he basically destroyed Cuban economy. He destroyed the fruit industry, everything, because he wanted to grow the sugar cane. And he started growing sugar canes in places you don't grow sugar canes. Sugar canes are supposed to be grown in a very humid, just basically in the mountains. And he was growing it everywhere, basically destroying 100 years of trees who would produce avocado, I don't know how you say it in English, mamey, just basically everything that Cubans had grown for years. So anyways, El Omap was basically a concentration camp. And my grandpa told me that Jehovah's Witness, they got it the worst, because a lot of, in their religion, it stopped them from doing a lot of things. They're not supposed to, for the flag. And right. One time my grandpa would tell me that this Jehovah's Witness, they were telling him to march. And he couldn't march. Like, I can't march. It's against my religion. It's against my beliefs. And they just shot him right there. Just shot. And my grandpa would also tell me that he would work basically from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m. and start working at 5 a.m. They wouldn't let them work. They wouldn't let them rest. They wouldn't let them do anything. So my grandpa would tell me that there was this other guy who just started, this other guy who was also working, and he was so tired that he just fell off. And when he wanted to stand up again, there comes this guard with the gun, and he just hits them right here, and starts laughing, and the guy just dies because the injury was so bad, he just died right there. And these are not isolated cases. Prisons in Cuba do the same thing. Anybody who wants to see a movie, there's a movie called Plantados, which I recommend if you really want to know what goes on in Cuban prisons. And my grandma, she was and also in a concentration camp, all for women. Let me tell you, they were put there because they just wanted to leave Cuba. Because if you wanted to leave Cuba, you had to work there. let's say 2 to 3, my grandma was 3 months, but people were there 5, 6 years. And you're even denied education. So people were like, oh, Cuba has free education, Cuba has this. No, they were denied education because they wanted to leave the country, and the revolution couldn't invest in them because they were going to leave. So like, it isn't free education. You pay with your freedom. Because I have a cousin who, he graduated from history, and they sent him to a museum. He didn't want to work in a museum. He wanted to be a professor, but no, they needed people in the museum. So he's earning there 33 cents the hour. Wow. Every day. And my dad, he wanted to be a computer engineer. And they told him, no, you need to be a mechanical engineer because that's what the country needs. So this free education, it's not free. There's limits, and there's things you need to do, and it's what the revolution wants you to do.
Right. There's nothing's free.
Nothing is free. Nothing is free.
The cost for everything.
Yeah.
So you have, like you said, you have a lot, or most of your family still lives in Cuba. Recently we've seen Cubans, up in arms in the streets, and they're not they're chanting freedom. That they want freedom. And the people I've seen and heard from, it's the same thing. They want freedom. They've since the 60s, or even before that, like they haven't had it. So the people, your family, the people that that still live in Cuba, what's currently going on right now? Because there's a lot of misinformation happening. You see that the news here in the United States covered it for like a week, a little bit, and there's nothing else. You haven't heard anything else in weeks from it. And I know you had Cubans that they're literally, like I said, chanting freedom. They're flying American flags in the streets of Cuba. They're not asking, we want the vaccine or this or that. They want freedom. So the people you've spoken to, your family, your friends, what is happening right now in Cuba? What are the people wanting, and what are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah. So basically, we saw that the protests started because there was a lack of medical assistance in the province. COVID cases were going up in the province of Matanzas. The situation has worsened up at 100 times in the island. There's no food. There's no food. There's no basic necessities. There's no toilet. There's nothing. There's nothing, and people are dying because there's no medical supplies in hospitals. And let me tell you, in hospitals for Cuban people, because in hospitals for tourists, because there's still tourists going on the island. Mm-hmm. If you put in Instagram #Varadero, which is like the most famous beaches in Cuba, there's people eating lobster. There's people on the beaches. I had an aunt that told me that she hasn't seen a lobster in about 30 years. So right now what's going on, the situation is more critical than ever. People are dying by the thousands. All these numbers you see that the Cuban government is giving, that people are dying of COVID, there's way more that you can count. Because I have an aunt who works there in the health system, and she was on the phone. She was basically just like so tired of what's going on. She was like, no, the government is saying there's thousands of people dying. No, there's 10,000 people dying a day, and it's because of lack of medical supplies. And there, I post pictures on my Instagram about people taking dead corpses in horses or in bicycles because there isn't. But you see then when the protests happen, you see these guards in the nicest of uniforms, in the nicest of cars. So people blame the embargo, and I want to get into this point. The embargo has absolutely nothing to do with what's going on in Cuba. It's not the embargo who's not giving out medical supplies to the Cuban government. The United States even offered to give out medical supplies to Cuba at no cost. They said no. The Cuban government said no. It's not the embargo who's stopping Cubans from entrepreneuring, from fishing, from killing cows. It's not the embargo, it's the Cuban government. The only real blockade that people talk about in Cuba, it's from the government towards its people. Because the number one importer for Cuba to this day is the United States. Currently, the chicken that is sold in Cuba, it says Kentucky, United States. And I saw it with my own eyes when I went to the market last time I was there. So what's currently going on, the situation is way worse than ever. There's working at the office of Senator Rubio. There's cases where people are saying, no, my husband died. The Cuban government is saying COVID, but it's not COVID. It died because of lack of medical assistance. The thing is, there hasn't been another uprising. Let me start by saying this uprising that happened July 11th. It has never happened in the 62 years of the dictatorship. There hasn't been another uprising because Cubans don't have arms. Cubans aren't armed, and these people are coming with guns. There's a video I posted on my Instagram that this policeman came and entered the house and just killed a man in the house because he participated in the protests. There's currently right now about 800 people who we don't know their whereabouts. They're probably detained somewhere, but nobody knows. People are tired. People want to change, but when you're distracted and in the basic necessity of what am I gonna eat, where am I gonna eat, you're distracted of what really matters. Like my cousin was telling me, I want to go out there and protest. I want to go out and share, but I have to go out also because I have a child to feed. I have to see what do I put on my table for my husband, for my family. So right now, what is going on in Cuba? There's 800 detainees. There's probably more, but we don't know about. The Cuban government is basically taking children and young adults with force to participate in the military to put more violence against the Cuban people who want to start an uprising. So there's hasn't because people are scared. The Cuban militia, the Cuban policemen are trained in Soviet style. They're relentless, they're cruel, they have no emotions, no remorse. So people are scared, and just adding that they aren't armed. So, like you said, the American media just talked about it for a week, but the situation now is like 10 times worse than it was July 11th.
Right, and no one's really covering it, and the information is not being able to get out of Cuba, which is a problem. I mean, pretty much what the best news is like you're seeing it through social media, but even that, like I've seen so many people post on Instagram, it just gets taken down. Twitter gets taken down. So YouTube taken down. So
yeah, I've been taking.
Yeah, and so there's so many countless people, and that's one of the most concerning things I've seen. And I get it that they're private entities, but with today, social media is the avenue that the most shared avenue where we get our information from. And if you're blocking that, that's concerning to what the future could look like. And so going back to the embargo, you said it very well. And from what I've heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong, like when things do get sent to Cuba, whether it's families from Miami or anywhere in the United States sending stuff back to their families, or the United States actually, when they do send stuff, it's always going through the government's hands, and they're going to take what they want from it. So you could send medical supplies and all this stuff, but the elites, the government officials, those people are going to get it first. And many times what I've heard is it never gets down to the people that really need it. Is this?
Yeah, for sure. My grandma, she sends $100. She hasn't been able to because they took out Western Union and the government isn't accepting. Now the Cuban government is only accepting euros. Who has euros? If you live in Spain. Mm-hmm. And most of the diaspora is here in Miami and have dollars. So anyways, my grandma, she would send about $100 every single month to her sisters, and when her mom was alive, to Cuba, and her nephews and her nieces, just to everybody. And she would send it, right? And the government takes about, I want to say like 30%. So if she would send 100, my family would receive $70. But the thing is, they never get to see the dollars. The Cuban government gives you like a little credit card, like a gift card, where you're supposed to spend it in Cuban government stores. So let's say you want to buy a cow that somebody killed, secretly. You can't do that because you don't have the money. You have this card that the government gives you. So what a lot of people do, that's why, in a sense, we, the Cuban diaspora is maintaining this system, is that when my family we would go to Cuba, we would leave dollars. Let's say we would leave about $300, $400 so they could go and buy things, like they say, por la izquierda, or by the left, secretly. So now with with COVID travel restrictions and that the Cuban government is only accepting euros, it's really difficult. So because people who receive money from the outside, they're basically like the middle class, within the Cuban scope of what a middle class would be in Cuba. So they were relatively well off, right? And this class wouldn't participate. So that's why a lot of uprisings, they start by people who have nothing, right? But now this middle class isn't getting anything, and they're losing that comfort. And a big problem with that is that we would send, in a way, we were maintaining this regime, and in a way, we were letting this middle class, these people be relatively comforted that they wouldn't have a necessity to go out to the street and stay bajo la revolución, down with the dictatorship, down with the revolution, because they're necessarily comfortable. And a lot of people who I've talked about, my grandma herself, were like, I'm not sending anything else because this has to end. This has to end, even if it hurts my heart and hurts my feelings. This has to end now. So basically, the Cuban government takes whatever it wants, and everything has to go through it. So when Biden said no, the Cuban want remesas, which is what we send, and we're like, you can't do that because this is a socialist dictatorship. Everything passes through the government. It's not going to get to the people. There's no way it's going to get to the people. So when Biden said that, we were very disappointed. So all these sanctions and everything has said, it's purely symbolic. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to change.
Yeah, it's frustrating to see, and like just the rhetoric and from our government, and it's a basic lack of understanding. They're not listening to the right people, which it's not just with Cuba, it's other places around the world too. They're not listening to the people they need to listen to. They're not listening to the people that it's actually affecting. When you go talk to Maduro in Venezuela, or you go talk to the government officials in Cuba, you're gonna get a different story, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not talking to the right people.
And here, all the Cuban diaspora, the exile community, even with dictators, you don't talk to dictators. You don't negotiate with dictators. Yeah. We learn from Venezuela. You don't negotiate with dictators. With dictators, you got to take them down. So when Biden said, "Oh, we're going to bring more staff to the embassy," we were like, "No, this is not what we want. This is purely, you're just helping the regime. You're not helping the people, because the government takes what it wants. It does whatever the hell it wants. So this is basically like a laugh in the face. It's basically the United States is doing what the Cuban government wants. Right? They want you to send. They want you to come. They want more embassy, because the Cuban government is purely for economic reasons. That's what they want.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, you don't negotiate with communists or dictators. Yeah. And I mean, look at the United States. We're negotiating with terrorists right now, and that's code number one. You don't ever negotiate with a terrorist. Yeah. And I mean, you could call communist or dictators terrorists too. I mean,
no, they are.
If you really want to go there, that's what they are.
No, for sure. The Cuban government, Fidel Castro, for me, the Cuban government is a threat for Latin America. It was Maria Elvira, Congresswoman Maria Elvira. She posted about how the Cuban government wanted to interfere in Colombian elections. The Cuban government has funded the FARC in Colombia. They funded guerrillas in Colombia, in Nicaragua, in El Salvador, just every basic part of Latin America. So how are you telling me that the Cuban government isn't a threat? It's a threat to us. They're a threat, and they're still threat. They're doing whatever they want in Venezuela. The Cuban police are in Venezuela. They're in Bolivia. They're everywhere. So how are you telling me, oh, they're not going to do anything? No, they are. The Cuban government is, in a way, imperialist. In a way, it's an ideological imperialism. They interfere whatever they want.
So You said you worked for Senator Rubio, and obviously Senator Rubio is heavily involved in what's going on in Cuba, and I'm sure. I just want to kind of ask you, like, so what working for him? What is coming through his office? I mean, from what you could actually say, I know you probably can't say a whole lot, but from what you can say, like, what are you guys seeing from the political realm of the world? From the senator's office.
So, we basically deal with constitution services. He has the same power as every other congressman and congresswoman. So we work with federal agencies. So here in Miami, most cases we get are for immigration, humanitarian parole. And I can't say much about what I've seen, because I get calls, and I'm a staff assistant, and I get calls. And I have to actually listen to these people, and sometimes it breaks your heart. You have to grow. It breaks your heart, and you just want to go to Cuba, like an example, and you want to help, but you can't because there's a bureaucracy, right?
Right.
So for Cuba, it's very bad. It's very bad. Mostly, basically, cases of humanitarian issues, lack of medicines. People are dying, and children are being left alone because they have nobody else to take care of too. And for me, Senator Rubio, my boss, what I really love about him, he does it from the heart. He does it because he lived that through his parents. And people here in Miami, they see him like a light of hope, and he really is, because he takes these issues to heart. But like I said, he is a congressman, and there's laws and there's a bureaucracy, so
right.
It's very heartbreaking. But I could tell you about 1 million cases, and they're gonna break your heart, and you're gonna be like, wow. When you actually listen to him, like people talking about it, you're like, well, this is a horror movie. Like, you only listen to these stuff in movies. So what we've seen through the office, it's just like, after the July 11th protests, there is a lot of people who are asking for their relative to come because they're scared. They're gonna be imprisoned by the government. So just the whole COVID thing hasn't helped either. So it's just like it's very desperating. People are going crazy. They're going nuts. It's their family. So yeah, basically just very heartbreaking stories about Cuba. And it's something, like I've said, these stories, they're not happening now. They've been happening since 1959.
Right.
Since when the revolution happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And like exactly. And it's frustrating to see, like, whether it's our administration or people here, it's like, well, they're fighting for this. Like, they've been fighting for this since 1959, 1960.
Mm-hmm.
This is nothing new. And it's just a lack of understanding and a lack of listening to people, and a lack of education on that aspect. And it's like, if you're not educated on it, don't talk, don't speak about it.
Yeah, for sure. And what I've tell people, because when I studied in Puerto Rico, the president of the Political Student Association, he was a big communist. And then when I present myself, because I studied in the west part of the island, a lot of Cubans do not live on the west part of the island. They live basically in the capital, in San Juan. So when I went and go study, it was like a very cultural shock also. And he comes to me, and I present myself, oh, my name's Angélica, I'm the daughter of Cuban exiles, basically just that. And he tells me, well, Cuba, Fidel Castro is the best thing that's ever happened to Cuba. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, oh, he did this and this and that. And you're not even Cuban because your family left Cuba. You're a gusana, which is like a very derogatory term for people who left Cuba, like worms. Basically. And you're like, your family isn't Cuban because they left Cuba. And I was just shocked, because I've never been harassed in a way like that, because I basically grew up in the most Cuban part of Puerto Rico. And he just started rambling on and rambling around. Like, I didn't listen to him. I was like, you know what? We have very different values instead of morals. And like I said, and like I told him, you can read thousands of papers on Cuba, which are basically what the government tells you. You
Right.
can go to Cuba and stay 3 days and go in a nice hotel and talk to the locals, and they will tell you what the government wants you to tell them because they're scared. And you can do a lot of papers and works, but the story of Cuba, you have to live it directly or indirectly, like myself and like people who live on the island. Although I was born in Puerto Rico, you hear it, and it's also like a very, because I feel very Cuban, but I wasn't born there. I haven't lived there ever. And they would, back in that university, they would tell me, it was very, very confusing also, because they were like, oh, you can't talk about Puerto Rico because you're Cuban, because your family's from Cuba. What do you know about Puerto Rico? And they would call me La Cubana, like the Cuban in that university. Like people would, oh, look at the Cuban. And my sister, La Cubana, the Cubans. And they were also like, oh, no, you're not Cuban because you weren't born in Cuba, you were born here. So it's like, what am I? Is that, what am I?
Right.
So it's like a very cool, but like I said, the Cuban story, you have to live through it, indirectly or directly, no matter how many papers you read or many have you've investigated. No. You have to live through it, and you will realize that whatever the media or whatever popular culture has told you about Cuba, it's not true.
Right.
It's 100% not true.
Yeah, and you're spot on with that, and our governments around the world need to. It's frustrating to even think about, but you got to talk to the people that have lived it, like you said, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Cuba, Venezuela, wherever it's at. If you go talk to the people, you'll understand what's actually happening.
Exactly.
And not just talking to them, listening to them, because governments around the world, you could go listen to a professor, you could go get an education on this, you could go listen to bureaucrats around the world, leaders around the world. But until you go down and listen to the people that have actually been affected in Cuba, Afghanistan, anywhere around the world where there's issues, you're never going to understand what's going on. And that's the problem, I believe, is that they're not talking and they're not listening to the right people.
They're not listening. There was this girl I know, and she was doing a live about how the embargo is to blame after what Black Lives Matter said about Cuba, which was very disrespectful. What they said about Cuba, they have no idea what's going on. And in that movie I was talking about, Plantados, I actually met one of the guys who was in prison. He was prison for about 35 years. And he told me, it's a bad thing to be in Cuba and in prison, but it's a nightmare to be in Cuba, in prison, and being Black. Because Cuba is it stayed in the 1950s. It's still a very racist country. Mm-hmm. Just pointing it out, it is. So basically what BLM said, very disrespectful. So it's actually, you have to listen to the people. You have to listen, because the best form of history for me is oral history and in first case stories. Yeah, definitely that.
Right. And I have a question here, and it's basically you attended university in Puerto Rico, and then you went to Florida International. Is that correct?
Yes.
FIU.
Yeah.
So, being Puerto Rican, Cuban, what was the dynamic from going from Puerto Rico to FIU, and what's some of the rhetoric you've seen? Because we do see a lot of, campuses tend to be very left. I went to Fresno State. It tends to be young people, and I understand it. People, they want to do good, and these things sound good until you, like we said, you put them into practice. What was that dynamic going from a university in Puerto Rico to going to FIU? And what were you seeing on these campuses? Especially being a political science major. I was also a poli-sci major, so.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So basically, I went to public university in Puerto Rico, State University. We're in American territory. So campus life, it was nice, it was fun, but it was very liberal. And what people don't know about, Puerto Rico is very privileged because we have the Americans. We have the dollar. We are basically, like, you talk to Dominicans and you talk to Salvadorans or anybody, you're like, Puerto Ricans, they don't know how good they have it being part of the United States. So when I studied in Puerto Rico, a lot of the poli-sci majors, they're very leftist, they're very communist, they're very socialist. And those people tend to be very pro-independence. And they want the independence for Puerto Rico. They want to be basically free. And it's a very bad hatred for the United States. Let me just tell you that where I studied in Puerto Rico, there was no college Republicans. And if you try to put something conservative, because I wanted to start a conservative club, I wanted to open the College Republicans, and I wanted to open up a chapter with Turning Point at that time. And if you would put something in from conservative, they would tear it down. And you would see all around campus, LGBTQ, whatever, social Salvador Allende in Chile or Fidel Castro. One time they did an activity about Venezuela when the protests were happening, and they had a picture of Maduro, just like the picture of him, just like very like soldier-like, very biased activity. Right. So just very liberal. The professors were also very, very, very communist. Most of them. I did a paper on Cuba, and the professor called me and said, "You can't talk about this. This isn't true." You know, it was a sociology professor. He's like, "Everything you've said about Cuba is a lie." You know that, and I'm like, "No, it's not." I told him, "No, it's not. I'm Cuban. My family's from Cuba." And in a sense, I wanted to leave the university because I feel like I'm not gonna grow here. I'm not gonna do anything. This is liberal land. So when I transferred to FIU, I thought, FIU, Cuban school, there's a lot of Cubans. But when I got here, I was very surprised that there's a lot of leftist professors and a lot of leftist students. And I was like, what? Where am I? Am I not in Miami? And I'm not in the Cuban capital of the world, diaspora of the world? And I had professors who would praise the revolution. And I was like, wow. And it's all a funny thing. In a lot of FIU, there's a lot of Cuban spies in FIU. About a few years ago, a professor was arrested because he was a Cuban spy for the government.
Wow.
But yeah, anyway, even after that, there's still a lot of leftists. And I was vice president of Republicans at FIU, and we would get a lot of hate, and we would get a lot of, and let me tell you, we were an all-girl Latina board. You know, because there's this assumption that Republicans are male and white and American. And we're like, no, we're a Latina. And we would get so much hate. And I was like, where am I? Am I not in FIU, Cuban Republican community? So it was a shock because I thought it was going to be way different, but it pretty much stayed the same. Yes, it was a bit more free in a way because you could actually open up a club. You could actually go and table. But you were not free of harassment or anything. It was still going on. So yeah, it was a shock in a way, but at the same time, it was better because you had more opportunities. Because sadly in Puerto Rico, political life for conservatives is very, very, very difficult.
Right, and it's sad. Some of these professors, it's very egotistical atmosphere, whether it's professors, and what I would say to not just professors, but different leaders, and what I have a problem with is not having an open mind. Like, if you're going to, I don't have a problem with if you're this left or this, but it's like, you better listen and at least hear out other people that maybe even disagree with you. And it's like, we could disagree and still be cordial, still be friends, and I could disagree with you. But a lot of people, they don't. If you don't agree with them, then it's like, no, like, we don't have anything in common. We're not friends. And
they cancel you.
Yeah, they'll cancel you. And if we can't have discourse with people we disagree with, what are we teaching the younger generation? What are we teaching these people that are coming up? We're teaching the wrong things, because even you're going to have people that you disagree with all throughout life, whether they disagree with you or not. And even our leaders around the world, our professors can't do that. And that's a problem.
And in a way, it's scary because the universities are basically raising these kids, because you grow up, let's say they brainwash you. Because I have a lot of friends. I was in a history class once, and there was this girl, and I think we were talking about Cuba, and then she starts speaking very loud. It's like, oh yeah, I'm first generation Cuban, so my parents are Cuban, but I love socialism and I'm socialist. And I was like, then she was like, I was very conservative growing up because my parents told me, but when I got to university and I started like listening to another point of view, then like, well, yeah, I'm a socialist. And I was like, are you kidding me? You're just basically just like laughing.
Like, you didn't comprehend what was going on at all, did you?
No, yeah, I was shocked. You're laughing about everything your parents went through just for you to say you're a socialist. it's very scary. I was scared. Because it was my first class ever when I transferred to FIU, and I was like, oh my God, where am I? Where am I? Where am I? Am I still in Puerto Rico, basically?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you just joining us. And before we end this today, I have a couple things. So, I see that, you do write articles, and like we said, you're very involved in what's going on in Cuba and just getting that information to the United States and your local community and everything else you're doing. So just quickly, would you talk about the work you're currently doing, your future plans, and also where people could reach you at and find your work at?
So I opened up a blog. It's called freedompoliticslatinamerica.org. I talk about every aspect of countries in Latin America, because I feel like Latin America, for right-wing conservatives, it's very difficult to find a country in Latin America where it's conservative, and it's basically the leaders are very populist: Venezuela, Nicaragua, Bolivia, just for example. Mm-hmm. So I give a point of view and try to advocate for freedom in Latin America. So I write blogs. You can find me there, Freedom Politics Latin America. I have one coming up because in Casa Cuba, where I was raised, we interviewed a few of ex-political prisoners. And it's in Spanish, but I'm going to write a blog post about it. And the video will have subtitles, which I'm releasing very soon, about their stories, about what they went through when they were in prison, about why they went against Castro. So stay up. I will post that on my Instagram. But you can find me there, and it'll be a pleasure if you can read my articles and my blogs, because a lot of people don't have a very few knowledge of Latin America and why it goes that way, and I want a lot of people from Latin America to read me, just to see another perspective of why what they've been taught about capitalism and neoliberalism. It's not bad. It's good. In a way, like capitalism is good. It's good to talk about freedom, and freedom would help all the problems going on in Latin America. So you can reach me on that. Right now I'm working for Senator Rubio, but I plan on doing my master's in journalism next year and hopefully work as a journalist.
Awesome. And what kind of journalism, the stuff you're kind of currently doing at a different level, or?
I'm just basically starting on that block. Hopefully want to get it very big.
Yeah.
Yeah, but basically basically that for sure. Awesome. Just trying to get it big.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing and just sharing, so many stories, and I look forward to, seeing the video of the ex-prisoners coming out, and hopefully sure. Our listeners, you guys will be able to take a look at that, and I'll post all your social media, your links, your website, and everything in the description on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all that. And last segment, we ask every guest, and there's so many people that help us throughout life, and we don't do anything alone. I don't believe that there's any self-made people, right? We all come from somewhere, and we all have these mentors and people that uplift us and help us get to where we're at today, or hopefully where we're going to be. And it's called the Freedom Fighter of the Week. So, Angélica, who is your Freedom Fighter of the Week? Who has helped you get to where you're at today, and who has been most influential in your life?
I mean, it's only one, right? Because I can't mention one if I don't mention.
It could be more than one. However so you want to word it.
I have to mention my grandparents. They basically raised me to the person I am today. They raised me to love my Cuban roots, not to forget about my Cubania, my Cubanism. They've taught me to love freedom. They taught me about what freedom is since I was very little. They've always told me we left Cuba because we wanted freedom. So they're the most influential people in my life. They've supported me in everything I wanted to do. And they basically risk it all to give my mom, my uncle, and me to have a better future, to have opportunities that they didn't get because they were born in Cuba. My grandma got married at 19, and she wanted to be a journalist. She wanted to be on TV, but she couldn't. But she had to give up basically that because she wanted to leave Cuba. She had to get married, raise children. So I wouldn't be where I am today without them. So they're my freedom fighters. I call them Lelo y Lela, like That's their nickname I give them. So I owe them everything. Everything I have and everything I know, it's because of them. So yeah, Leli Lela are my freedom fighters.
Awesome. That's wonderful. And I just, again, I appreciate you coming on the show and everything you're doing, sharing so many stories out to the public, whether it's on social media or on this podcast. And yeah, hopefully we could do it again. I really appreciate you
For sure.
just taking the time to be with us today.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor. I followed you, and I love what you're doing. I saw your segment with Maria Fernanda, which is a dear friend of mine who I love so much.
And she connected us, so that's
no, her story is amazing. So yeah, keep doing what you're doing what you're doing. You're spreading the message, and we have to keep this voice, not to lose this country, because this country is the best country in the world, and we don't want to lose it to socialism.
Absolutely, and I just I'm grateful for these platforms we're able to share this on. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Blade, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We appreciate you and your support of the show. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave feedback on Apple Podcasts.